The Why Didn't You Test That podcast want to improve your software. Join Hugh, Rich and their guests. They share experiences and insights on the many sides of better software delivery.
Hello everyone. Hi Rich.
Hello.
As ever, you are sporting another sporting
Nobody
logo.
today. There's nobody today. Since I wore my swim
just
shirt, we've gone downhill big time.
Right, so no, it's going to become a theme now. You've got to start wearing. I assume you are going to come watch the Oxford Bolton game, right?
I couldn't. No.
You couldn't in case there's a picture of you seen there.
Couldn't bring myself to it.
Hey, hello. We have with us Chris Dutta from Dragonfly. The product is Neuro. I'm just reading about it. It looks absolutely fascinating. I really need to have a bit of a rummage in here. I suspect there's quite a lot of overlap in some of the stuff that we do as well here. But you seem to be very much right in the middle of what we're up to, I suppose. The rough chat today, which I'm going to sit back quietly and listen to you do for a bit. Maybe just kind of, Chris, maybe just introduce yourself a little bit about what's getting you excited at the moment in the testing space. I'm sort of slightly loath to use the word testing because it's just such a cul-de-sac of the death of dreams and anything really. So we're trying to sort of move it out into the kind of just, it's just more about better software from our point of view, and testing is obviously part of that, but it should be, as Rich and I have talked, it's sort of job one really, and how you design a system to be testable. If you don't do that, then it's not a very good system, because you can't actually get it out the door. So today's, once you've got through the kind of intros, maybe you two could just kind of riff a little bit on kind of value streams and where you think they've come from, just initially, and then maybe we can kind of sashay into where they are at the moment, and where you think people can practically start using them and start thinking differently to kind of understand where they are and kind of move on and actually improve the quality and improve the speed, which is kind of our mission statement, I suppose.
Great. Well, look, thanks for having me here. I completely agree with everything you just said, Hugh. If I'm honest, I think when one starts to talk about testing, it does tend to result in a certain reaction depending on the audience that you're talking to, whether that's the business, whether it's broader tech folk. I think we're absolutely where you guys are in talking about quality for what it is and needs to be embedded throughout the tech life cycle. To close out the intro, I head up consulting at Dragonfly, so we've been around for best part of 15 years now. We were Piccadilly Group previously for about a decade. We rebranded a few years ago to bring together a couple of other business lines that we had. First and foremost, we've always been about quality and quality engineering. We then spun off one or two other separate brands, but we pulled it all together under Dragonfly. And most recently, we've stepped into the product world. And among other things, our product, Neuro, does value stream management, does a few other bits and pieces as well. But we really see testing and QA and quality has been very central to VSM and value streams. And, if you get, I think as we all know, and I know on the previous episodes you talked a lot about Nationwide, we're still working with Nationwide and probably don't talk too much about what's happening there today. But I know, Rich, you certainly touched on some of that stuff in the past. And I think if you get testing wrong, it can suddenly become a very big cost and a very big part of that value stream and the lack of flow, obviously, that then results. But if you get quality right, then really, that really just improves the whole experience around a value stream. So that's really where, as an organization, we come from, is this idea of underpinning our whole approach to testing and quality engineering through this idea of value stream management. For us, everything we do has got to align to business value, business output, quality, flow, that sort of thing. I don't know, Rich, if that
Yeah,
Sounds
absolutely.
familiar.
I think to kind of lead into a conversation. I think if I may ask, if you can kind of define what you see as value stream management, and then talk about I guess the spectrum of good and bad in terms of what you see people perceiving it as being, and how they potentially implement it or not, as the case may be.
Great, yeah, happy to do that. So value stream management for us is really about improving the flow, the quality, and the value that IT provides to the business, typically via software. Obviously, value streams being a set of activities that result in some kind of benefit to the end customer. So exactly to your point, we see all flavors of this. I mean, I think the term value stream is quite well known now in our space. And part of the reason I was really excited to come onto this show, and it's very kind of you to ask, Rich, is, and I think we were talking one evening a few months ago, and we were saying really for many years, certainly in the first half of my career, not a great deal happened in the, I will say, the testing space, because it was software testing. It was testing very much so back then. And I think certainly in the latter half of running Dragonfly, we've seen an enormous change wherever you look, right? Across industries, across technology, you narrow it right down to testing and quality, and it's no different. I think the kind of technologies that are driving change across all industries, all verticals, horizontals, are doing the same for quality right now. So that was why I was excited to talk about that here. I think, just to answer your question there, I think we see an industry and businesses and some of our clients who are very much new. They might understand the term value stream. Yeah. They might be doing some kind of flavor of agile. And as I'm sure you've discussed previously, that can mean many things to many people. Really then managing value streams and value stream management. If I'm really honest, we don't really see many organizations doing it that well. Yeah. Is the short answer.
Why do you think that is? I've got my own theories, but kind of you see, and we called it the kind of the cargo cult of agile before, by which we spin up these small groups of pizza-sized teams who all work in silos, and it's almost anti-value stream management, right? You've mentioned the end-to-end flow, by which almost agile is interpreted in the wrong way as these little small teams doing little small sprints, and then they chuck it over the fence to some big event to pick up the pieces. Do you think that's kind of a big problem in terms of? Yeah,
I think you're spot on. Dare I say the term agile? What we've ended up with is organisations doing their very best to be agile. Obviously, there's huge benefit to that if you can get it right, and I don't think anybody would dispute that over the what was typically predominantly waterfall. 10 years or so ago. I think wherever we go now, whenever we land with a new client, it's very common for teams to be doing their flavour of Scrum or Kanban, and again, without going down, without sort of deviating into, the different, which style of agile works best. I think everybody has their own interpretation of it, but I think there's one thing, talking about it and saying that you'll do it. I think inevitably the forces that exist within large organizations, take hold and that they naturally lend themselves, I suppose this is my own personal view really, that they lend themselves to a waterfall-esque style scenario if you haven't got the right people and the right knowledge and the right skill set sort of shaping that.
I've seen the common interpretation and therefore implementation of agile, right? And everybody in a silo, and at the same time bringing in value stream management. It kind of seems opposed in terms of why do that when you're going micro in terms of what you're implementing there. And I kind of come back to why did we do all of those things in the first place, right? And for us and the organization you've already mentioned, right, we very much took the kind of the DevOps industry kind of pill, if you like. And so you can almost point to books. Got the Better Value Sooner, Safer, Happier that talks a lot about flow and value stream, and time to value is the thing that always pops out at me in terms of why do value stream management, right? And there's another book whose name escapes me that essentially talks about a value stream management tool that I can't remember what it's called now. And again, that was very predominant in the organization we worked in, and therefore that's why we tried to do value stream management. The interesting part was that became more of a kind of a spreadsheet based exercise that an external team did, rather than the kind of the value stream actually owning what was efficient flow. Do you see a lot of that kind of dipping organizations dipping their toes into value stream management because ultimately the externals are doing it as well, and therefore we must?
I don't know whether it's fair to say, but I'll say it anyway. I think lots of large organizations, in our experience, and we've obviously worked with many, choose to rip up the playbook and do something alongside new leaders entering the fray and new strategies, that sort of thing. So I think there's a certain fashion that comes with doing this sort of thing. And you can see that sort of ripple through the industry. I think to your point, in terms of managing those value streams, because you end up, and again, Agile is another interesting one, isn't it? And I was having this conversation with someone yesterday that really, this idea of talking about projects versus products sits at the heart of a lot of this. And, how are you structured and what are you delivering at the end of it?
I was trying to think of the name of the book, and it's basically project to product, isn't it?
This is as if I knew, Rich.
Yeah.
I think you end up with a small proportion of purists who probably lead the industry and know that playbook and they know it backwards and they're certified. But unless you have those people in your teams, and dare I say, within each value stream, you then have somebody who also is almost as certified, then you're always going to then have some level of interpretation. So you end up with this a little bit of a mishmash of styles and language and topology.
It's an interesting one as well around not just tooling or the kind of direction of travel, but also the culture in terms of, and measurements are good, right? But only if they're used in the right way. And, especially if your value stream is still siloed, the measures become a weapon to hit the person next in the stream or, deflect. Whereas the behavior of continual improvement, improving flow, that's where you're really going to get the bang for your buck in terms of implementing these kind of things.
I think, as Hugh mentioned at the start, in the evolution of VSM in the space of 12 months have gone from not many people really knowing what they were. We'll forget about the regulation that's just come along with exactly the same acronym, which also sort of touches on our field as well, because that's equally as confusing. But this is the Google Dora metrics that I'm talking about here. Fortunately, unfortunately, I think they're a very nice way to simply provide a guiding set of KPIs and measures that can be used to determine some kind of understanding of flow, efficiency, quality. 4 simple measures there: deployment frequency, lead times, change failure rates, the time to recover, MTTR, against any production failure. They are the 4 simple Dora metrics. Now, we have a slightly different spin in Neuro. We take a Dora Plus approach, as we call it. Recognizing four metrics are probably by themselves a little bit too simplistic, but for what that has been able to do to everybody's understanding, and whether you're a CTO, whether you're a head of delivery, C-suite, organizations are starting to align themselves to Dora now, which is great because I think it gives everybody a common language. Obviously in the testing space, we've had that for years, 100 different flavors of testing. And so it's quite helpful to be able to point to testing glossaries and standards and that sort of thing. So I'm all for something that becomes, even people who aren't close to it can understand and buy into. But exactly to your point, one has to be careful about how those measures are interpreted, how they're used.
Those measures are just, I'm just looking them up now. It's like you can game those so easily. you could be saying, oh, we're doing fantastically, but
Yeah.
does it actually have anything to do with the cost of a feature coming out and the number of features? And I don't want to talk about features, but more growth in the product. How do you put in things like refactoring? Where you're going backwards to go forwards. I mean, those are the really, really important things. I mean, these just seem to be mechanical lights on a James Bond computer in the background with some whirling discs. They're pretty much meaningless, without an understanding of where they drive through to what the business actually wants. Or actually, I mean, this is something we probably should talk about a bit more some other time, Rich, is that the business doesn't actually know what it wants, which is another problem, which maybe we should we'll do another one on that, So,
but Hugh, you absolutely hit the nail on the head on two fronts there. I think the whole business not knowing what it wants, for me, is this idea of you can have all the new tech in the world, but there are fundamentals that we always need to keep in mind, and they haven't changed. For me, they've been the constant in our industry for the quarter of a century that I've been involved in testing, and we see that frequently, right? And played out in the data that we get through tools like ours and other VSM platforms. Now, to your other point, you can game those at such a high level. Now, I think this is where what we say, and without wishing to continue to shamelessly plug our platform,
go for it.
It's
fine. It's fine.
Excellent.
Yeah,
excellent.
Go
Okay.
for it. Don't worry about it. It's fine. It's nice to have someone say, yeah, we're evolving platform. It's good. People are getting value about it. Yeah. So blow your trumpet, man. Go for it.
Excellent. And you can always edit the bits out.
No, we won't.
No. So this is why we say we take a Dora plus approach, because even at that top level, if we can not just talk about flow and total ticket age as an example, but actually look at the time a ticket spent in each state, and differentiating between the type of state. So if you're looking at states that create value versus those that are potentially slack in the system and are inactive states. So if we go back to our grassroots as testers, as quality engineers, the one I always hone in on is any tickets that spend time in failed states or blocked states. They're the ones that in a classic sort of defect triage, we're talking about defects, that is, rather than any kind of new feature, they're the states that suddenly push out delivery. And Rich, I know, sure from your experience, the thing that kills projects the most really is defects, and anything that you can do to bring in fixed times and reduce any kind of waste in that life cycle, that's the sort of metric that we surface. And therefore, Hugh, exactly to your point, we're looking already starting to apply a slightly different lens across what might just be something like lead time. How long does a ticket take from the moment it's in development, let's say, all the way through to being deployed?
So you need to have some kind of complexity metrics on that ticket. And my world, and the world that I've been banging on about, it's the testability of that ticket. How hard is it to test? It's like you've got this great 3-word ticket, which has, in effect, it's going to impact the testing of, you've got to retest 17 APIs, you've got to retest the security protocols, you've got to do this sort of thing. So that very indigestible chunk of gristle is coming down the esophagus, and it's got to somehow make it all the way, well, maybe that's the wrong analogy, but it's got to make its way through effectively out the door to the user. But how would that be measured then, and everything is just a ticket?
But look, now we're delving into this secondary layer of metrics that I mentioned. Part of the evolution of VSM now, and what we as Neuro do, we can hook into any tool in the tool chain immediately. So there isn't any config required, or minimal config, let's say. Tools a few years ago, and even some tools that are out there now, require a team with knowledge to be able to set a VSM platform up. Now, we're trying to make this really light touch, a turnkey type service, a very self-service experience. The idea being that we will take in data from your code repo. We've got ML running on that repo that looks for ticket references. So obviously when developers are making commits, they put a message against each commit. We look at that message, we look for a ticket ID,
I mean, the reality is that you got a single line of code change. Last week we were talking to Chris with Sea Lights, and we've done it ourselves, where you basically have instrumentation built in, so that a single line of code, which you basically know which tests are linked to which code, so you don't have to go and search for tickets. It's more so we now know which for that single line of code, that is one ticket, but that is associated with possibly 150 test cases, because we know those are the ones that exist. We also know there's some gaps because we've got the requirements. We know there's some requirements gaps. So that gives us 2 to 3 more metrics. Now, those tests may well come from other tickets. So you then got an impact analysis that someone has put in these tickets, which say, this is the recalculation engine for a reversal. And suddenly you're testing the reversal system, because those were the original tests that were used on that piece of code. So, that's spiraling out from where you are. And that's the hard stuff in IT. That's the thing, that impact analysis. The problem is, the pyramid selling company. I mean, none of the engineers or the owners of the business trust IT at all, because every time they fix one thing here, they would break 4 things over there. Measuring that in value stream, just sort of say that, well, that's just going to go, it all went a bit bang there. What happened? Oh, is that a black swan? Well, it's an entirely predictable black swan. You knew that this one ticket is going to cause this amount of carnage before you did it. If you can predict that, how does the value stream reflect that in the management reports or the metrics that they are then presenting up? That's what I'm kind of curious about.
This is really where my first conversation I think I had with Adam, who's obviously from Dragonfly in my previous life, was almost exactly this problem, right? In that I've already mentioned my organization wanted to do value stream, but probably the same problem that you've articulated, Hugh, in terms of it was more about project management, value stream management, if that makes sense, right? So it was saying how long things might take, but it was based off people's perceptions. All right. And coming from the other side, obviously, from previous pods, you will know that we've done a hell of a lot in terms of modeling out how systems work. Right. And so modeling out in a very modular way. So going up the test pyramid, for example, modeling out APIs, basically the building blocks of how different systems work together. Right. And therefore they are value streams in themselves, right? They are the technical product implementation of a value stream. And so if I can do optimization of those models, so I don't want test cases necessarily. This is where, is a model a test case generator, or is it an optimization of paths, and therefore tells me complexity at a objective level rather than a subjective level, right? If you're doing estimations within agile, they are subjective today. And so how do we get away from that? Actually, if I can create a model that gives me an independent complexity score, I can base story points off that if I'm doing it in Agile, or I can base my estimates if I'm doing it somewhere else, right? And so it gives me an incredibly powerful, independent, living, updating, all of that, articulation of complexity along my value stream. I need to align my model to my value stream that will stay intact. It will show me my black swan if it's coming about, right? If I make a change upstream and all of my daisy chained models all of a sudden have a combinatorial explosion, I'm going to know that purely through working through my value stream, i.e. updating my model in an early BDD conversation. But there's so many other benefits depending on your organization, right? I've already talked about the estimations, but inevitably you're going to be working with a lot of SIs, right? Where they are incentivized to do certain things around cost saving or automation and things like that. And to your point around gaming numbers, it's very easy if it's subjective. Whereas what we always talked about was, how do you get that objective layer in there that modeling gives you, by which I can't game the complexity of a model. Otherwise, I'm artificially making a system more complex than it needs to be. And I can't do that, right? My model always needs to represent what the system does. And so how do we bring that product engineering discipline into the value stream management? And so essentially what we're talking about here is an integration between Neuro and Modeler, which is kind of what we're talking to Dragonfly about as we go, right? We're working with certain customers around implementing.
Indeed. One thing I would say is one is always right, and I welcome the challenge from any client, and every client that we have has presented its own flavour of this sort of challenge, because having the data is one thing, understanding the value of the data and actually having confidence in the data is another thing. And we've seen that play out across different types of metrics. Exactly to the point you just mentioned, Rich, I think if you can join different data sets, and the more data sets that you can join, then often the more accurate and the more confidence one can have around the accuracy and the integrity of the metric that's been displayed. So when I mentioned that, this is just one way, another thing that we do often to understand complexity is we look at what are the touch points associated with a ticket, how many people have been involved in that, and how many times did a ticket go back and forth across teams, across people, and really starting to then build up a picture of the complexity of that ticket versus other tickets. And we're talking at a ticket by ticket level. Often in reality, we're aggregating this up, looking at a sprint by sprint, or dare I say, if we're doing some kind of performance review, we often take a 6-month view so we can look at trends.
Put in as many metrics as you can put in, and that could be your code quality, that just runs. Now, how good a job is it doing? It might just be sitting there. It's only later on does someone actually goes on. One of your senior programmers, you give him a week off, and he actually sits there and goes through and actually puts in some decent, kind of sets of rules and suddenly the data from, July onwards is a lot better than the data prior to that kind of thing. But you kind of need to be able to record that. This is a problem with artificial intelligence, is that there's just data.
Yeah.
It doesn't really notice that somewhere in the middle, someone actually, improved the objective stuff of it. Even things like, we've looked at sentiment monitoring. We basically, I think we could probably turn it back on again. If you turn on sentiment monitoring on all of the chat that's going on in, whether it's Jira, whether it's Slack or whatever, you can pretty much guarantee it's a very good metric in terms of whether this release is going to go out, because you can tell from just the positive and negative vibes of the chat that's going on, and that's really straightforward, and it may well be that that you sort of isn't this the point of artificial intelligence, is that we would then be gradually introducing more metrics for it to actually be able to kind of predict. Now, again, none of that makes any sense without a model of what the hell it's supposed to do, because it's if you look at what artificial intelligence can do, and again, this is what James and Alex are working on with us, is that they take a requirements document, turn it into a model, which is a picture, and a picture, and it will create user stories out of it initially, obviously, then later on it's test cases. And what you find is the AI will just make an absolute hash of it. So you then iterate through with the good old human coming in and say, that makes no sense, that makes no sense, let's ask someone this question. What happens if this is, are those two things likely to ever occur again together? And this is only something the business would know. It's, you can't infer it because these are green fields. Once you've got that world working, then you're using modeling and artificial intelligence in that world, but then you've got something stable which can then feed the tickets, which can then feed the test cases, which can feed the impact, which is what Rich was talking about.
That's the consolidation, right? Almost codifying it into a model consolidates that learning, and therefore you don't need to learn it again, and therefore that is a single version of the truth. That's an oracle, not just in terms of what testing needs to do, but what the system does. Right? That's banked. Almost getting into the testing and the checking debate, which let's not go there, but essentially it's the same kind of thing, right? And I think one of the interesting things going back to value stream management to me came out of DevOps, right? And I think there's yes, on the face of it, those measures can be superficial, right? But they're underpinned by Accelerate, which is another book reference that, again, we all got into those things as well, right? And I think one of the interesting things, again, DevOps can be seen as quite a superficial thing, right? Like a tool chain. And what does DevOps, what does testing mean in DevOps? It means test automation. Actually, it doesn't, right? If you look at the underlying principles of DevOps, it goes into understanding I think it's something like an ever increasing understanding of what the system is doing, right? And that's exactly this conversation we've just been having, right? Yes, you're going to automate those things off the back of it, but that's because everything is set in stone and very repeatable, right? And I think that, again, there's a big misinterpretation. And to your points you mentioned at the start, Chris, all we're talking about here is going back to basics and having a really good understanding about what you're actually doing.
Exactly. I think that's a great summary. I think for us, the direction of travel is very much about building in, really then being able to surface those key insights. Because I think if you, as you said, if we look to add metrics and data points, that's great. But what we've seen, and again, as you said, Rich, we've got clients in common. It's very easy for people to quickly get lost in the data. People are just blinded by charts and visuals, and as good looking as we think Neuro is, it's still a bunch of charts that, if we're not able to easily surface, the key insights, the things that are really going to shift the dial in terms of delivery, in terms of improving flow, and exactly, that's a really good way to describe it, Hugh. I think earlier when you said, actually, because this developer came and joined the team on this day, suddenly we saw an uptick in output. I think that's a great way to put it. I think actually we want to be able to surface that insight. So, flow improved over this period. Why was that?
I mean, I suppose the thing is, now once you start introducing this concept, the concepts will sound absolutely rock solid, and it's basically what was the metric you called it? Dora metrics. So Dora metrics plus maybe Dora metrics exponential or something like that's a better way to think about it. So you're sort of adding all this lovely stuff in. Now the problem is that there's two issues here. One is that you can tell with the different teams, and it could be an old mainframe team, but they're actually pretty agile in the small a. And you've got a bunch of, young programmers who think they know everything and can't see anything different, So, but then you've got the communication between those two teams. Now, the communication between those two teams is pretty much where everything goes wrong in terms of an understanding of what information is passing backwards and forwards, what validation is passing. Oh, well, I thought you validated that, blah, 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 blah. So all those bugs that show up sort of 4 months later when all hell's breaking loose because you get all this bad data in the system is because of that communication. Okay, so you've got these Dora metrics exponential should be able to pick up that, because that is a crucial something that is going wrong there. But then also you've got to persuade these two very different teams to be able to buy into an understanding of creation of the same levels of metrics going into them, so you're not sort of, we measure those in apples and quantum leaps, and you measure it in green figs and ham. So how do you get this sort of commonality driven down into an organization?
That is one of the things that underpins Neuro, in that we have a normalisation engine, as we call it, which essentially allows admin users to choose how they wish to display certain units. So in that example, if to use green figs and ham as the basis of displays for commonality, we can very easily change that mapping. So I think that partially answers your question in the sense that we often go into large organizations that have, let's say, multiple Jira instances, all configured differently, different projects, different statuses. We are able to easily normalize all of that. I think the part that it doesn't answer is, what if actually they're just fundamentally different? So you can't, an apple here doesn't necessarily equal an apple there, because the base units are different. Then obviously, we would work with organizations to take them on a journey around data maturity, and we've got a very rigorous process around that.
That's it, because there's sheer bloody mindedness as well of certain teams, and then there's also SIs, and SIs, the last thing they want to be done is measured.
Yeah.
By especially something external, because we started at the beginning talking about gaming this, and they would just game the crap out of it. And let's be honest,
game the crap out of it. But I also think we also know how to anti-game it. Be that gamekeeper, I suppose. And I think there are there are always going to be opportunities to game the system, of course. But at the same time, we know where to look, and we know how to then bring online different attributes that then quickly shine a light on.
I don't think, I just think I think that's all fair enough. I think that's fine. I mean, but I think it really has to come down from management and say, it's like when SI comes in, this is the way we operate. We want you to pay on your own dime for a week for your guys to come on our training courses where we're going to train you up in these metrics. And one of the metrics is how well you adhere to our metrics, So I think that's the kind of area where you could I think this is magic news. I'm just, being a bit curmudgeonly here in terms of just, having to deal with some of the problems and how the hell do you kind of batter your way through these problems, and a big old cudgel is probably the way to go with this one, I would suggest.
Yeah, no, I agree. And Hugh, don't you're not alone. We're well versed in having these types of conversations, and I think what I would say is when what's the alternative, right? The alternative is in large enterprises. So, forget the sort of smaller organizations, because we work with many of those as well. But in their world, sometimes it's a bit easier to get a handle on performance and, that whole sort of Peter Drucker, measurement is management and all that sort of thing, where you're dealing with big organizations who've adopted scaled agile. We see very frequently organizations really struggling to understand, because teams are bought into the agile manifesto and they've got all the different tools, depending on which pod or squad, or everybody's working differently. All the, as you say, figs and ham and cheese and grapes and the whole smorgasbord. And I think really what we're saying is, what's the alternative? The alternative is you either just let that continue, and actually as a CTO, as a group CTO, or head of delivery or portfolio manager, whatever it may be, you really aren't able to predict whether you're going to deliver on time or have anything meaningful to really work with as part of delivery, or you tackle the problem through something that actually isn't that difficult to do, because we're not asking teams to change the way they work. We recognize that everybody will, people don't like change. People want to work the way they're used to working, and that's okay. But actually what you'll be able to quickly see is, here's what good potentially looks like. And here's maybe what isn't so good. And here's where, as a leadership team, where to start to look in terms of actually, can you squeeze more out of what is obviously going to be a strained system, because every organization is under the same pressures at the moment. Just to sort of wrap it back round to quality and testing, it's such a big part of it. We've always known for years that testing is much more than it just sounds. Testing you can apply right from the start, in the analysis, in the design, in the development activity. And then there's obviously the old-fashioned testing that we obviously are very used to in the sort of dynamic testing space. But this is just an evolution of all of that, underpinned by technologies that are around today, really.
Very interesting. I think we should probably revisit this one, Rich. It's how do you actually roll this out? Maybe some real kind of practical examples would probably be a way to go. How people would approach it from a top down and a bottom up, isn't it? I mean, that's really what it is. It's like, what are you going to do? Yeah. What do you come into the team and say, right, this is what you're going to do. Bugger off. And you say, well, and then management are going to get, you've got competing management teams, who, unfortunately are generally far away from technology nowadays. It's pretty rare you get a C-suite who's got a clue about tech, which is bizarre because most companies are IT companies. Okay, well, fascinating stuff. Chris, you're way too nice. Okay. You should be much meaner to us, I think. That's really nice.
Duly noted. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I could guess you have a very different style. Well, I think probably me at one end, Rich in the middle, and you in the other. Okay. Well, great to meet you, and really good chat. Thanks very much, and see you all again.
Bye-bye. Great stuff.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Why Didn't You Test That podcast. To continue the conversation, head over to curiositysoftware.ie. And don't forget to subscribe for more episodes.